they're doing their own thing. We're gonna go ahead and start. So thank you all for hanging out, waiting for me, and having a good time before I showed up. My name's Angie Atkinson. I'm a supervisory park ranger here. I spend most of my time managing the Licensed Battlefield Guide program, if you've heard of it. It's 140 individuals who are licensed to give tours of the battlefield for a fee. They're the only people allowed to do that. So that's 90% of my time. In fact, we just started a licensing process back in, last December, and it's been ongoing. So we've been adding some guides to the fray. Still have more to do through this fall. But occasionally I get out on the battlefield and get to give some programs. So it's been a while since I've done this one. But today we're going to look at walking in the path, in the footsteps of the soldiers that participated in Pickett's charge, at least the Pickett's division element of this charge. Technically speaking, called Longstreet's Assault. It would be assembled by 12 to 15,000 men, depending on which author you read and all the accounts and all the statistics that you look at. But it was kind of two elements. It was the Pickett's division, which is what we're going to focus on. It's kind of on this side of the house, so to speak. And then you have the other element commanded by Generals Pettigrew and Trimble. They're done by their men. And that would basically, if you're looking at the trees directly behind, on the other side of those trees is where those individuals would line up. All as part of the master plan for July 3rd, 1863, as eventually put forth by General Lee and his commanders, and even for the entire campaign, which was to defeat the Union Army outright, crush them if possible, either end the Civil War at that point or turn toward Washington, D.C. Because Washington, D.C., if we want to get our bearings, we have east is this way, north, west, and south. And so Washington would be roughly 80 miles to our south. And if Lee, being up here in the north, could threaten the capital of the Union, he might be able to end things. Okay, so I say all that, and I do want to back up for a second to bring us here. So we kind of got this overarching goal now, but how do we end up here at Gettysburg? How do we even end up to this point where these men are in this situation? So, brief little history of the Civil War. Begins in 1861. Initially, you have the Union states, the Confederate states, tons of disagreements over the institution of slavery, and along with everything else related to that. The economics, the state rights, the individual liberties, and so on. Everyone kind of thought, maybe not everyone, maybe that's too far. Lots of people thought that this would not be a long war, that it would be over in a few months. We're gonna figure this thing out, and it's not going to carry on. Well, 2 years into the war, and it's a whole different story. So beginning in 1861, by late 1862, September of 1862, the war is going to start to take on a little bit of a different tone. It's not now this kind of brawling. There needs to be some reason behind it. The Union had previously kind of taken the stance that, again, this is not going to take long. We'll be able to get this finished in a month or 2 or 3. Shouldn't be a problem. And now it's struggling for 2 more years. So they're also losing a number of battles against the Confederate Army. They're not performing as well as one might have hoped. If you're living in the northern states, you're hoping for victory upon victory upon victory. And, reading in the newspapers instead, significant casualty lists, changes in generalship, decisions that you may or may not agree with if you're living in the northern states. And now, for the Union, there's going to be, by late 1862, looking into 1863, there's going to be a push for peace. Hey, 2 years of this stuff and we're done. We're tired of seeing the newspapers. We're tired of seeing the casualty lists up north. We're tired of not seeing these victories in the newspapers. And so now President Lincoln is caught in a little bit of a dilemma here because, initially to save the Union, it's not working. It's not, you know, that talking point is not working anymore, he issues something in late 1862. Does anybody know what that is?
Emancipation Proclamation.
Emancipation Proclamation. Now, instead of just a battle for the Union, we have a battle, in a sense, to a moral high ground. We will free those that are enslaved, or set the framework to do that, and we're going to free those individuals. And now the war could potentially take on that of a moral high ground. And so that's what the North is kind of looking at. Now the South is looking at a completely different kind of position, where they want to be able to keep the way of life that has been. And for the first 2 years of the war, maybe expected or unexpected, I don't know, not inside many people's minds, but the war was going in their favor. General Lee and various other generals were winning a number of battles, sometimes outnumbered, sometimes in very difficult positions, sometimes when the odds were stacked against them. And, you know, the folks down there, you know, seeing the newspaper reports, they were like, well, this is fine. We're taking the Union Army to task, okay? But the larger picture, though, is that it still hasn't been decided. You know, the goal is not to drag this on for years and years and years. So we have the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation in 1862, and then Lincoln's got this moral high ground. Now he wants to move the war toward, he wants to kind of, you know, give some more strength, in a sense, to the Union Army. But Robert E. Lee is also realizing something about his army. And he is realizing that most of the battles for the first 2 years of the war have been fought in the state of Virginia. Now that's his home, okay? That's one of the reasons why he left the United States Army, was to fight for Virginia, defend his home country, as one would say. But he's coming to a realization that even though they've been winning battle after battle after battle, Virginia, it's been taking a toll, okay? At agrarian communities, farming communities throughout that area, what do thousands and thousands of soldiers live on? Food, supplies. You need fuel for cooking, so you need to tear down fence rails, right, to help start these fires. You need supplies like flour, cornmeal to make food, bacon, anything. You're going to completely devoid the trees in an orchard if that fruit is ripe, or maybe not even ripe for picking, but you are that hungry. It was very common for these soldiers to get their rations, and then for 3 days, they would get 3 days worth of rations and eat them right away, because you did not know what tomorrow would bring. So better to fight on a full stomach than save that food and not be able to use it. But Virginia, that state of Virginia, was really, in a sense, becoming decimated by all this fighting and all these individuals surviving, literally. And so Lee wanted to get the war out of Virginia. He wants to give his state a chance to recover, get some crops into the fields, let things grow. You can imagine, as we're going to do here shortly, that soldiers just don't walk nicely on the roads. Okay, soldiers are going to walk where the battle is. They're going to get to the location where the battle is, and that could mean cutting through wheat fields, corn fields, what else? Rye fields, oat fields, whatever it is that they're growing. And as soon as you do that, what have you now done? You have now depleted that farmer of those profits, right? Of the goods to start, but the profits at the end. So he wants to get the war out of Virginia, so he's going to bring it north. And that's how we're getting to where we are today. He will, through the spring, there will be some campaigns, again, some successes for the Confederate Army. But now at this point, he is looking to invade the North, cross over the northern border, and his sights are potentially set on Harrisburg, not Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. There's really not a whole lot going on here. All right, we got about 2,400 people at this point. There's not, it's not a major city metropolis, but Harrisburg would be the capital of Pennsylvania. And if one were to gain that and take over that, you have access to rail lines and interstate commerce and such. But then also sort of a direct line, used to supplies, but also a direct line to Washington, D.C. So we can't see them to our west, but Robert E. Lee in the spring of 1863 would come up behind a mountain range. We call them mountains here on the East Coast. For those of you from the West, maybe rolling hills. Speed bumps, maybe, speed bumps. They're very small. But we like to say they're mountains. Coming up behind the mountains to our west, Lee would come up through the month of May and arrive in Pennsylvania by late June. He would send out various branches of his army, arms of his army, to various different towns like Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, toward Harrisburg, toward York, Pennsylvania, which is to our east about 30 miles. So he's kind of fanning out, gaining supplies for something that's going to happen. He's doing this on purpose because what is he trying to do from Washington, D.C.? He's trying to draw General George Meade, who will eventually be the commander of the Union Army by the time of this battle. He wants to draw him away from Washington, D.C. He's not in D.C. He's actually near Fredericksburg, Virginia. But nonetheless, he wants to move him far enough that he can't turn around and go cover the Capitol. Because when I used to do this type of program for young students, I would kind of talk about it as capture the flag. You know, once you got that capital city, which was Washington, D.C. for the north, Richmond for the south, once you captured that capital, in a sense, the game was up, because that's really the heart of those two entities. So he wants to draw General George Meade, eventually General George Meade, the Union Army, away from Washington, D.C. The best way to do that, go where he shouldn't be, right? He shouldn't technically be in the north. And so that's what will happen. By the end of June 1863, he's fanning out and does not hear a whole lot about the Union Army pursuing him. Does not receive a lot of messages, does not get a lot of information about the pursuit by the Union Army. Eventually, though, by June 28th, now we know this to be a few days before the battle, right? About 3 days before this battle starts. They don't know that something is necessarily going to happen that soon. But by June 28th, Robert E. Lee will finally get word that the Union Army is not deep in Virginia like they were supposed to be, that they were actually on the march and approaching and within roughly a day's march, depending on which part of the army you're looking at, close to the Confederate Army. And that will come as a little bit of a surprise to him. The Union Army will be pursuing the Confederate Army. They will initially, the beginning of June, they are commanded by a gentleman named Joseph Hooker, who did not fare well at previous battles. He wanted more reinforcements. He wanted extra troops before they kind of went on this march. And he attempted a sort of bluff where he would write to President Lincoln and he says, you know, before we're going anywhere else, before we're pursuing this Confederate Army really significantly, I want, men out of Harper's Ferry, West Virginia it was today. I want these men out of West Virginia, and I want them to join the Union Army. If you don't give them to me, I'm going to resign. Well, Lincoln was like, thank you, and signed off on that resignation. And now, June 28th, a lot happening on June 28th, 3 days before the battle, General George Gordon Meade is in command of the Union Army. General Hooker did not keep his corps commanders. That's what General Meade was previously. He was a corps commander for the 5th Corps of the Union Army. He did not keep his corps commanders up to speed on things. He was kind of, what do we call it today, gatekeeping. He was keeping that information right to himself, right? He wasn't really sharing. He wasn't managing by committee, so to speak. He was making some decisions on his own. Meade was uninformed about kind of what the overall plan was. But on June 28th, he's got to get up to speed very quickly and figure out how he's not going to lead just a corps of, let's say 8,000, 10,000 men. Now he's going to lead an army that is 90,000 strong. That's a pretty big jump in responsibilities, right? That's not just going from some supervision on, of your team of 5 people. Now you're leading a company that employs, 3 million, so to speak. So Meade will begin to move the Union Army up as well. Lee will then begin to concentrate his men toward south central Pennsylvania. The reason he's going to see this area as a functional place to be is because if you've ever looked at the town of Gettysburg, we look like a wagon wheel. Okay, if you can picture the hub of a wagon wheel, that center portion of a wagon wheel, and from that the spokes generate out from that hub of the wagon wheel. We have 10 roads that come into the small town of Gettysburg. And it's not because that's a great place for a battle. Lee's not looking at it that way. He's just looking to move massive numbers of people quickly. We've all been in a traffic jam, right? We've been in a traffic jam. And before we had the advent of GPS and Waze and, you know, all those cool little apps, once you were stuck on that highway in that traffic jam, unless you knew the area, the safe bet was you're probably kind of going to stay there, right? Because you don't know what the other roads are. You might not even be near an exit ramp to jump off on. Well, when you move troops, when you move soldiers, it's much the same. You put them on one road, and again, we don't have massive highways in 1863, but you put them on one road and you're stacked. And if you want any sense of alacrity, for these men to move with any sense of alacrity, you have to provide multiple avenues of approach in order to get there with some decent time, within some decent time. You stack one person on, or you stack thousands of men on one road, they're marching in column, and it's just miles and miles and miles backed up. So these 10 roads Lee sees will help concentrate his army, again, not looking for battle specifically, but to concentrate and get his army back together. Remember, we are west in Chambersburg. We are east in York, if we're the Confederate Army. We got some north, we got some soldiers north near Harrisburg. We need our army together if there's going to be a battle. July 1st, that battle will take place to the west of town. It is a meeting engagement. It's not supposed to happen. Lee had sent out orders, do not bring on a general engagement, because he wasn't ready. He didn't have everybody here. This is enemy territory. He doesn't know necessarily the lay of the land. Well, that's not going to happen. Long story short, that's disobeyed. And the engagement will begin July 1, 1863 to the west of town. Now, Confederate soldiers arrive, Union soldiers arrive. The action in the morning will sway back and forth. There will be a lull around lunchtime, and then the action will commence once again in the afternoon as, again, the armies are continuing to bring up soldiers. For the Confederate Army, and this is why I went over this in the beginning, for the Confederate Army, it was unplanned. It was slightly unorganized, if we're being honest. It was not everybody was on the field and ready to go. And by 4 p.m. on July 1, 1863, Robert E. Lee had a victory near Gettysburg. His men were able to push the Union Army from the west of town. They would come, in a sense, this direction, and they would end up using the ground about a mile to our west. So from the west of Gettysburg to here is where the Union Army would fall back to. Victory on July 1 for Robert E. Lee. Similar story, right? For the first 2 years of the war, sometimes outnumbered, sometimes unplanned, but still comes in as victorious. July 2nd, now Lee wants to continue this advantage that he's got. The Union Army is kind of still on the run, not all here. He feels that he's got the advantage from that success. There's a morale disadvantage. That was timed absolutely perfectly. They were frustrated. That's exactly right. They were frustrated. Oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? Yeah, so morale can be low when you're in a sense, your home turf, the North, the Union, and you had to retreat from your position to a new position. But Lee wants to take advantage of that. And so his thought is, as the armies continue to arrive and expand, the Union Army will be along Cemetery Ridge. If we look off to our west, what do we have? We have a large barn with the spires on top. That is the Cadore Farm. That will become important here shortly when we take our first steps forward. To the left, you will see an obelisk. It looks like the Washington Monument, kind of a pointy monument. That's the U.S. regulars. Continuing off to your left, you will see a line of trees. You'll see some traffic as well. And following off to your left, you might see two small white buildings. the home, the farm of Abraham Bryan, a free person of color here in Gettysburg, who evacuated the town during the battle. But behind that farmstead, behind that white farmstead, is Cemetery Hill, and that's going to be the area that the Union Army starts to retreat back to July 1. As they accumulate more and more soldiers, they will begin to place them south down Cemetery Ridge toward eventually what we'll be able to see are the round tops. They will come into play. Now, the short story for July 2nd is Lee wants to take the advantage. He sees that the Union line does not extend all the way down toward those high hills. So what he's going to do with his men along this ridge where we are today, Seminary Ridge, which attaches to the Lutheran Seminary to our north, he will have the Confederate Army come down this ridge line toward the south. He will then commence an attack from the south, and what he wants them to do is sweep across all of this ground, about 3/4 of a mile, and attack the Union line. It has something, and these will become important here in a minute. The Union line has an open flank, or a flank in the air. Does anyone know what that means? Have an idea?
You're out there unsupported by adjacent troops.
There's nobody next to you, right? At some point, you were the end of the line, okay? And you're looking to your right or your left, whichever it may be, and there is not a soul there. And you are the end of the line. You are the flank of the line. The Union Army's flank it didn't have anything else. Now, eventually a line ends, so there will always be that end flank. But Lee wanted to take advantage of that. He wanted to send thousands of troops to our south, swing them across those fields, attack that open flank, and eventually try and take Cemetery Hill. At least push the Union Army off of that high ground. July 2nd, most of the action happening where we cannot see from this vantage point, but Lee will attempt to do that, but it will end in a stalemate. It's really a tie. There's some gaining of terrain, there's some moving forward, but nothing significant enough to really change the course of the battle on July 2nd. But Lee did have something. And again, this is the 30,000 foot view. Lee did have something. The Kadori farmstead, the Kadori barn, the red barn there, just to the south of it, roughly, there would be a breakthrough by the Confederate Army. Remember, they're taking all these thousands of men across these fields, aiming toward that line, and for a moment, they did break through. For a moment. But that's all General Lee needed. He needed that breakthrough as kind of confirming that, well, if a brigade could do that, and a brigade is 1,200 men, 1,000, just depending on the casualties that they've taken. If a brigade could do that, could 9 brigades do that? Could 9 different brigades break through the entire Union line and end what is becoming the Battle of Gettysburg? That brings us to where we are standing today. The plan for July 3rd, 1863. Lee has won July 1st. He has seen some advantages during July 2nd. He wants to capitalize on this July 3rd. But the other thing pressing against him, so he's got all these things in his favor. The one thing that is not in his favor, that he is very much aware of, is that through 2 days of battle and a 30-day campaign, roughly speaking, through June, since they took step 1 from down in Fredericksburg, Virginia, they have taken on casualties. So you don't just take on the battle casualties, all right? You take on casualties on the march, those that are sick, those that are weary, those that are footsore, those that end up AWOL, all right? You lose numbers. And so added to that, now you have battle casualties. He is 150 miles away also from his supply base in Stanton, Virginia. So he is living off the land, and he can only go so far to gather supplies because he can't disperse his men too far in case of battle. So he realizes he may only have one more push, one more chance at defeating the Union Army. So he will look to that advantage that happened on July 2nd, And he will say if one brigade was able to break through, if I send 12,000, 15,000 men, that line has got to be weak, and I should be able to walk away with victory. We're going to talk about how he starts to set this up as we make our way down this path. Before we do so, just a couple quick safety warnings. On my way over, the ground is great. It's a little rocky. It's got some holes in it by our fellow groundhogs, so please do take care as you're walking on that. The bugs are prevalent. The nope ropes were non-existent, at least at this point. So, no snakes, but lots of bugs. Please be aware that as you're walking, you're gonna, be next to some brush and stuff, poison ivy all over the place, so be prepared for that. And also, as we commence our march, so to speak, I will not be returning back to this spot, okay? So we're gonna make our way, just so that we're all clear, we're gonna make our way from here. We will end up over there by a clump of trees known as the copse of trees, and that's where the program will end. Now, we got a nice little walked mode path that we're gonna follow. For those that parked here, once we're done, if you choose to follow, you'll need to route yourself back to your vehicle. Or, if you've got an extra person with you, you can give them directions and they can come on around and swing back around and pick you up. But I just want everybody to be aware of that. For those who do not want to continue, that's absolutely fine, but we're going to make our way out to some artillery. All right. Well, it looks like we brought a good chunk of the group with us. Such a hardy folks. Okay. So, we took a good time leading up to exactly what's going to happen July 3rd, 1863. And I'll be honest, I kept you in the shade for a while, because guess what? There's no shade for the rest of the program. So we tried to enjoy that while we could before we headed on over. If you've noticed, one thing I forgot to do was have you noticed the terrain as we were walking up this direction? You can turn around and take a look if you choose, but we're standing on another ridge. We came through a swale, we went down this path, and we came up to this ridge. And this is going to be a common theme as we advance through the field of Pickett's charge, and these will come into play in a number of ways for advantage and for protection. Okay, the first advantage that the Confederate Army will have using these swales is related to what we have right here, which is a piece of artillery, this cannon. And we're going to talk about this. There's a row of cannon. We've got 2 bronze guns, 2 iron guns, Parrott rifles down there. And what this is representative of is the initial staging for Lee's plan. He had a couple different plans on July 3rd, a couple different ideas of what was going to happen. We're going to focus on what he eventually determined, in a sense, was going to take place. We talked about bringing those 10,000 men together to assume a frontal attack. We say a charge. Let's just use a frontal, an advance forward. They weren't running pell-mell, at least out of the gate. But in order for that to work, Lee said he had this advantage. He broke through with a brigade against the Union line in our distance. But he needs to continue to weaken the Union position. As time ticks by, Lee is gaining more troops. More troops are arriving on the field. Specifically, General Pickett's division will arrive late July 2nd, not be thrown into battle, but ready for battle July 3rd, 1863. And all the while, again, as we look across to the Union line, you can now see the domed monument with the angel on top. That is the Pennsylvania Memorial, largest monument on the field. The Union line would start to extend down beyond that toward the Round Tops. The Round Tops are these large hills off to our right. You have Big Round Top on the extreme right, Little Round Top just to its left, a smaller hill that would have been devoid of trees during the time of the battle. Big Round Top fully wooded. Doesn't make sense that the higher hill has all the trees. That would have been much more useful for the Union Army. But the smaller hill, no trees, Little Round Top.
Ma'am, sorry to break your concentration. You gotta land and fly on your backside.
On your butt.
For God's sake. No free rides.
No. Yeah, it's back here.
There it comes.
That's
Yeah,
all.
it's awful.
Okay.
Somebody kill us.
You know what? And then you look like a fool trying to stomp on them because they jump so weirdly. There we go. All right. Well, they'll join too. So what Lee needs to do in order to break that position, because that's going to get reinforced and reinforced and reinforced as time goes on, is he's going to use the ridge that we're now standing on as an artillery platform. So this gun here, along with the guns off to your right, my left, he would have over 150 of them heading down this ridge line. To our right, there is a red barn poking above some trees. They would go beyond that, and they would actually curve east toward the round tops, toward the Union position, and end in what was Joseph Sharpey's peach orchard. It's now on you, sir. Yep, there you go.
That's one of them freaking lionfly. Kill
Oh
that.
yeah. So, I didn't count on them for the program.
One casualty.
One casualty. Very good. So Lee is going to want an artillery barrage, and he's going to use this ridge as advantage because what does it have? It has a sight line. When you talk about Civil War artillery, the one thing that is not available on this tube, and everybody can gather a little bit more around if you can't see, but right here in the front would have been a triangular pyramidal looking piece that was a sight. Okay, it would have rested right in this depression, been right here. On the rear of the tube, is there a Haas seat there?
Down.
Well, there's that. Is there anything
Yes.
there? Okay, so on the rear of the tube, you would use this funky thing called a pendulum Haas, and you would place it on the back of the gun, and then you do a lot of math. I'm liberal arts, I don't do the math, okay? I do the story. But you would do some math, and you're able to figure out how far, how high the arc of the artillery ammunition. You're going to figure out the distance and how long the fuse might need to be set if the artillery shell had a fuse. And you do all that. But the whole time you're doing this, you're doing it by sight. And you have to be able to see the enemy. Well, by placing it on this ridge, they could roughly see the enemy, about 3/4 of a mile to their front. Are they able to see individual people? Maybe. Yes, it looked like clumps. Would they be able to see some guns? Well, you know what? These guns were not green. They were gold looking. They were bronze. And so they would glint in the sun. So maybe you could see them moving. They did have binoculars, so you would be able to utilize those, field glasses, as they were called many times. But you still had to be able to see the enemy, or at least see the approximate range. And that's why you needed the higher ground. You can't do that back in the valley that we just came from. So you need to be on this artillery platform. 150 guns all along this ridge. And the idea was this. This artillery barrage would take place, and all the guns would receive a signal. Once that signal gun fired, they were to all open up, and they were to have something called concentrated fire on the Union position. So they are going to fire, roughly speaking, all in one place. They are going to have all their guns kind of in this semicircle, this arc formation, all firing toward the center of the Union line. Now, not just one tiny center, but the center of the Union line. And that is going to be to weaken the Union position. You don't just want to give the enemy, in this case, as we're walking in the footsteps of the Confederates, you don't want to give the enemy the advantage of just waiting for you. So you want to weaken that position. And then the other component to this artillery barrage, maybe it was going to last maybe about 15 minutes. You know, really that heavy concentrated fire wear down the Union Army. Lasts about 15 minutes. And then what was going to happen was there was going to be an infantry attack. These are the foot soldiers, the guys with the rifles, okay? We'll get to their setup in a second. They're actually behind these guns. But what would happen is the infantry would launch forward, and then the cannon would follow behind in support. You don't just send your infantry guys out there and hope for the best, you know, good luck, but you want to have enough ammunition in reserve. That will become an important point in a minute. You want to have enough ammunition and guns in reserve to help bring that firepower forward. Because the infantry, what are they doing as they go across these fields? Do you know what they're doing?
Shooting.
Not shooting yet.
They're not shooting yet. Because the guns, the rifles that they have, only have a range of like a couple hundred yards. We're 3/4 of a mile. All they're going to be doing is walking. So they need the support from the artillery. So the idea is that as the infantry would advance, the artillery firing upon firing would advance with them in support, keep that pressure on the Union position. Now I get to go into my quotes here. Oh, I already skipped all of that. There we go.
Yay.
One of the artillerists, Colonel E.P. Alexander, would say this, relating to Lee's plan for July 3rd. He said it was evident that we had not finished the job, meaning on July 2nd, and would have to make a fresh effort in the morning. Lee wanted this to start in the morning of July 3rd. Why do you want to attack in the morning? Give me an idea. Why do we want to attack in the morning?
It's cooler.
It's cooler, right?
Use up the pace.
It gives the Union less preparation time. Exactly. Both right. Well, what other reason maybe?
More time to exploit your advantage if you break through before dark.
Exactly. We don't fight at night. Well, we did here at Gettysburg, but we don't typically. Why else maybe?
Cooler shade.
Cooler shade. But why is that important? We say cooler in its shade, but there's a larger reason for that.
You're fresher.
Camouflage, you're fresher. Water, you aren't losing as many people. Okay, as the day ticks on, if you're out in the sun, how many people do you think we would lose right now if I kept everybody out here for the rest of the 2 hours and, or, you know, we just kind of cooked? People are going to they're going to walk back to their cars, right? They're going to be saying, you know, that's too much for me. So, what?
Probably half.
Probably half. Have some faith. Come on, we're going to do this. But yeah, so all these reasons. It gives the enemy, in this case the Union Army, less time to change their position, less time to reinforce, less time to gain more troops or advantage, or less time to what? Attack. Couldn't they could counterattack, right? Or they could attack in their mind. Maybe they look at this and maybe they don't see it as maybe the smartest idea from their perspective. They're behind some stone walls. They've got advantage in that. But they could launch an attack. The more time you give the enemy to plan, the more things can change. So he wants a morning attack. And Alexander was writing just that. For the Confederates, that will not happen. They will not be able to coordinate. They will not have everything in place for a morning assault. In fact, there's supposed to be something else happening on the far side of the field that we can't see. And there was supposed to be a diversionary attack against an area known as Culp's Hill. It was to keep that part of the Union line occupied so they could not send reinforcements to the center portion of the line. Had this happened in the morning, that would have been a brilliant start to July 3rd for General Lee, because part of the Union line would have been occupied, and then part would have had to deal with this artillery onslaught. But that will not happen. Let's talk about the infantry. The infantry, Pickett's division, is going to be one half, let's just say, of this attack. The other half, again, beyond the tree line to your left, my right, behind those trees would have been held up by Generals Pettigrew and Trimble. 15,000 men total. We're going to focus now on Pickett's division of about 6,000, 5,800 to 6,000 soldiers. Where are they going to be. They are not going to be on the top of the ridge necessarily if they can help it. They are going to be in a variety of places off to your right. We are about the end point of General Armistead's brigade. And General Armistead, within Pickett's division, there's going to be 3 brigade commanders. General Garnett, General Kemper, General Armistead. These 3 brigades will be those attacking forward in Pickett's charge. Armistead's men are going to be hidden in the trees behind you. We are at a location known as the Point of Woods, and it does kind of jut out to a point directly behind us. But down off to your right, this section of woods continues, and Armistead's men would have been inside, part of them would have been inside the tree line, and that would have provided shade, some shelter for them. The rest of Pickett's division, unfortunately, if we are to look down to our right, what we see currently is open field planted with soybeans, if anybody's wondered. I believe that's what that is. Not original to 1863, okay. But that's what the farmer selected to plant. But as we look down beyond this ridge, it does kind of dip down into a valley toward the red barn of the Spangler farm. Garnett's men and General Kemper's men are going to be out in the full open, down in the valleys over there. And because we had mentioned that this attack was going to happen in the morning, all these infantrymen are brought out about 9 a.m. They're arranged in order. Again, Armistead kind of here, Garnett slightly to the front, Kemper off to his right, and they're out here by 9 in the morning. And they're lying down on the ground. Some are hunkered under the apple orchards, the cherry trees. Others are in these woods trying to get shade. It's not 74 degrees in October. Well, we're still September. I'm jumping ahead. In September. But it's about 80-something degrees in July. They're all wearing wool uniforms. They have a small canteen filled with water. But as we're looking around, there are no rivers or creeks nearby. Not even a kind of well that's nearby. And they're lying on the ground, and they're out in the sun. And they wait, and they wait, and they wait. And they know something's coming. They have a pretty good idea that they're headed this direction. They're headed to the east, because they're all facing that direction. They have a pretty good idea that this is going to be a significant attack, looking at all the soldiers preparing for it. But still, the orders have not come. It is not until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We always say approximately, because everybody's watches were a little different back then. It was not until 1 o'clock in the afternoon that the cannonade will actually begin. General Longstreet, again, we mentioned that this is technically called Longstreet's assault. Longstreet, Lee's second in command, is going to be responsible for kind of overseeing this attack. He's going to turn to Colonel James Walton of the 1st Corps Artillery, who's also helping arrange many of these batteries. That's the groups of cannon that they're going to be utilizing. He turns to him and he says this. He says, "Let the batteries open. Take great care and precision in firing. When the batteries in the peach orchard," down to our right, those are the signal guns. "When the batteries in the peach orchard cannot be used against the point we intend to attack, let them open on the enemies on the rocky hill." Now, it is very clear to the Confederate, those in command, that number one, well, they have an advantage of an high artillery position once they step foot, once they launch that infantry attack, and they move out, in Armistead's case, they move out of the woods, or they move up to a ridge line. They are under absolutely no cover from the enemy. There is nothing that will protect them once they begin that forward march. And from the vantage point of Little Round Top, the Rocky Hills off to our right in the Union position, they now have artillery up there after all the activities on July 2nd. That is a massive advantage as you're looking down that hill and you're looking at lines of men walking across open field. That's what Longstreet means to Walton. He says, be aware that as you are firing, as soon as those infantrymen step off, they are going to be under the fire of those guns. And if you find that it's too hot, turn your guns to face them and at least try and keep them occupied, so that way the artillery fire does not rake through the Confederate infantry. How long did we say the artillery assault was going to be? It was designed to be 15 minutes. They will launch at 1 o'clock and it will last 2 hours. It will be a 2-hour Confederate barrage. They are firing roughly about 240 shots a minute if you take all the guns total. You can fire, 3 shots a second from your individual gun. And as they do so, as they start launching this, as they're gaining their range, figuring out exactly where their shells are dropping, the entire field starts to be filled with smoke. Remember how we said that you have to use sight in order to be able to aim this gun and have it be effective? I mean, you can fire it all day long if you want, but if you're not hitting your target, it's not being effective. Once you have 150 guns open up, the crisp, clear view that we have is no longer. I was hoping there was a dense fog advisory this morning, and I was like, I hope it hangs on till this point here, but it disappointed me. It did not. Okay, it's humid, it's hot. You now have this sulfurous smoke. It smells. All the guys smell. They're hot. They're tired. It becomes difficult to see. And the other thing that the artillerists did not realize about their ammunition was that the fuses on a number of those rounds were not accurate. So you have this fuse, and the idea is that when the black powder is ignited, it will burn this paper fuse, and the paper fuse burns down into the shell, and in 6 seconds, 7 seconds, how many seconds, that is its flight, and then in those 5-6 seconds, it's designed to explode above the enemy and rain down shrapnel. Well, what they did not realize was that their fuses were inaccurate. And so what they thought was going to explode in 6 seconds was actually not exploding at all, sometimes exploding too early, which means it's just hitting open field, and maybe some skirmishers that the Union Army had advanced. Or, since they couldn't see, it was exploding or going behind the Union position, and it was not having the desired effect. Another reason the cannonade went on for so long is the idea was we're going to pummel the Union line, take out all their artillery pieces, and how do we know that we've done that? They don't fire. They stop firing. It gets quiet, right? And that's exactly what happened. But what the Confederate Army did not realize was the Union Army, their chief of artillery, actually called a ceasefire to the Union guns and said, you know what? Yes, we're replying back. We have to for protection. We have to for morale. But at some point, something bigger is going to happen. We need to hold our ammunition. The Confederate Army took that lull, and they thought they had weakened the Union position, but they had not. They would not realize that until they got over there.
I have a question.
Yes.
How did they know when they started at 1 o'clock, and you said it was only supposed to last 15 minutes? And here, if they're stocking their guns and that, how would they stock enough ammunition for another extra 3/4 of an hour?
Good question. So, they know how many rounds of ammunition they have. It's all kept in wagon trains beyond the ridge, okay? And the idea is you can do some math again, and you can figure out approximately how many rounds you're going to go through in those 15 minutes. And then the rest of that time was supposed to be the support and move forward, okay? Alexander knows how much ammunition they've got. and they can't stop firing because the Union keeps replying. So they have no choice. They're kind of stuck now. They have to go through and use that ammunition. And he will get to the point where he realizes they hardly have anything left. And they will basically deplete their guns. Now, there were supposed to be some guns in reserve. He had 9 more guns in reserve, but there's a whole story with that, and they got moved and traded around, and they were not available. So that would have been 9 more guns with ammunition, but they weren't available for the charge. But he does get to that point. Here we go. And you go right into my next note card with the quotes. Look at that. You should be up
You're
there.
welcome. You're welcome.
Just make it easy for me. Now, at this point, Alexander, knowing that the cannonade has gone on for too long, but there's really been nothing that he can do about it, by 1:25, again, time's approximate, Alexander writing to Pickett, "General, if you are to advance at all, you must come at once, or we will not be able to support you as we ought. But the enemy's fire has not slackened materially, and there are still 18 guns firing from the cemetery." Now he's talking about that area, Cemetery Hill behind the white buildings and down Cemetery Ridge. He knows it's not easing up, but they can't not keep firing. Later, by 1:40, again approximately, to Pickett from Alexander, "For God's sake, come quick. The 18 guns have gone. Come quick, or my ammunition will not let me support you properly." Alexander now knows, he thinks he knows 2 things. He thinks he knows that they've weakened the center position, but he's actually incorrect on that. He does know for a fact that they only have 5 to 15 rounds of ammunition per gun left. That's it. 5 to 15 rounds. How many did we say approximately they could fire per minute? 3. They have what, 5 minutes worth? That's the math I can do. You know. All right. For those infantrymen, they aren't realizing any of this. I mean, they're hoping that the artillery is doing their job. And now they are called up by 3 o'clock, again, roughly speaking. They are called to rise. And remember, they've been in the trees, they've been down behind the ridge line, and they are going to advance forward. And that is what we are going to do as well. I'm going to follow this path right here to get to our next stopping location. Yes, sir.
Historians have a consensus on the exact location where Longstreet was leaning on the fence and nodded for Pickett to go.
So you use the word consensus, and no.
Yeah, just do you have? I mean, it's generally considered right here. Right?
It's generally considered here
But
in the
that's one
point of
your
woods.
thoughts or your statement.
I couldn't tell you. I don't really know if I have a location. And it's because as soon as I say right here, someone's going to be like, no, it's over there. Keep in mind, this is, but you bring up a very important point, because we like to know definitively where something occurred.
Right.
Because that's important to us.
Right.
Keep in mind, this whole thing is fluid. Longstreet is up and down the line. Pickett is up and down the line. They are meeting up with Lee. They are, conversing with each other. There's orderlies running up and down the line with, or aides running up and down the line with messages. So it's not a static environment. It's, as much as it's a fluid environment. So I know we want that one moment.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there is a true consensus.
And the second part of that, in an extension, is the location where Pickett said, "Sir, I have no." Would that be farther down the Spangler's Lane?
I would predict it would be Kadori Farm and west.
Where Lee?
Yeah.
So where did Lee exactly watch the beginning of the assault?
Roughly, Lee is here by the point of woods. That's why the Virginia Memorial was
It's put
placed
there, okay.
where it was. Yeah.
I heard people say that the Virginians were further down to the left to where the monument actually is. Is there any truth to that?
Well, it depends on which Virginians. Like, you've got Virginians as part of the Pettigrew and Trimble assault. But as far as the Virginians that made up Armistead, Kemper, and Garnett, they are further down this way, actually. There is actually a significant gap in between the 2 elements of Longstreet's assault. More so than I think a lot of folks realize. Once we, and this is the problem sometimes with monuments and putting things out on the field. They want to put, a lot of times monuments go out in heavily visited, easily accessible areas. Down this way to the south is not necessarily accessible to Kemper's brigade and to Garnett's brigade, so we talk about Pickett's charge right here as if these soldiers were standing right here, when in fact they were way further south than where we are. But as far as those other Virginians, I'm not quite sure. I mean, Pickett's men are going to be further south this way, and there are other Virginians further north that are part of the Pettigrew and Trimble piece. All right, watch the groundhog holes. Keep your eyes out for nope ropes, and we'll continue forward.
Hey, miss, where was the barn and stuff that they were fighting over on the morning of the July 3rd?
It would have been that away. It no longer stands. Where am I? I'm all confused now that
Right
I'm on
there.
the ridge. No, not right here. It would have been over there. The Bliss farm would have been over that direction. Yep, kind of straight ahead from where we're standing. And that would have been some skirmishing, and then it would have been a blaze.
Yeah, they
And
set
then-
on fire so
yeah.
the sharpshooters
The
couldn't
morning of the
use it.
3rd, yep.
What crops would they have had out here
Oh gosh.
in 1863?
Wheat, rye.
Sorghum?
I don't know how many sorghum we have had sorghum lately, but as far as sorghum fields, I don't know of any in the battlefield proper from 1863. Wheat, rye, hay, various things like that. Excuse me.
Grains versus, say, corn that might be hard to see over?
We did not seem to have a lot of corn in these specific farms. A lot of orchards. We definitely had a lot of orchards. One thing you also would have noticed is there would have been a ton more fences throughout many of these, what we call pastures, this agricultural land.
Miss, would you like a chair?
Soldiers talked a lot about the number of fences that were in the way, had to be torn down, etc. All right.
That was my question.
We have reached kind of the second ridge, and one of the reasons we're going to stop here is to help point out the extent of Longstreet's assault, Pickett's charge. Behind us, over our right shoulder, we have moved out now. The tree line behind us would have been where Armistead's men were roughly located, at least the left of that brigade, and then the rest of that brigade kind of came out into the open. It was not all shaded. Further down, you can see now the Henry Spangler farm, which is the red barn and the white building kind of down in this valley, dipping down again off over our right shoulder. Garnett's men would have been roughly in front of that, Kemper even a little bit further to the south. So we tend to think that Pickett's charge happened in this kind of tiny window. It was not. It was over a mile long in length. The other advantage to this location right now is we can see the other component of Longstreet's assault, which would be the area where Pettigrew and Trimble's men would have organized. We turn around over our left shoulder. We can see, again, a distant tree line. We can see some monuments along that tree line and open space, and that's roughly where Pettigrew and Trimble's men, North Carolinians, Virginians, Tennesseans, are going to form up and be that component of the charge. You are talking about a mile, roughly a mile long front from their left, your left, all the way down, passing where we are, south toward the Spangler farm, beyond that, to where the end of Kemper's men are. A mile wide front. They are all focusing on a position directly ahead of us. We again came through a swale. We are now on the top of a ridgeline. At 3 o'clock, when those men were called forward, make sure I got my quotes right, there we go. When those men were called forward, they are going to rise. The colors, the flags, are snapping in the wind, and they are going to begin their advance. Remember, the initial idea was that the artillery was going to advance with them once they moved through it. All 150 cannon are in front of the infantrymen. These infantrymen will have to walk through all of those batteries, which means that the artillery cannot fire for a significant amount of time because they've now got their own troops in front of them. They can only elevate the tube of that gun so far, and that's not really something you want to chance when you're doing that. So the infantry will extricate itself from the artillery and begin that advance. They are not running. They have got a significant distance to go. They are not going to be running out of the gate to start this quote-unquote charge. They are walking. They're walking in formation as best they can, but as soon as they rise, as soon as they extricate themselves from the artillery, they will be under fire. They will be under fire down in the valleys and especially up as we crest this ridge. Looking to the south, we can now see the round tops almost directly in our front. There are artillery batteries on top of that hill, and they are going to be trained on these Confederate soldiers. If I could help again make this point a little bit more, there is a fence line directly behind many of us, directly to our back. This fence line is running south. Carry that fence line visually. Carry that fence line even further south. It's the post and rail fence with the five boards going across. Carry it even further south as far as your eye can see. That's how far the Confederate infantry went. That's how close it was getting to that open hill. What starts to happen is, and we are almost kind of forming our own little battle line here, but as these infantrymen will be advancing, that artillery is coming on their flank, on the end. The regiments, the smaller units of soldiers, the regiments on those ends are going to take a beating. Because when that artillery is fired, they can use two types. They can use what we call shell, which is the kind that has the fuse and explodes above and is designed to rain down stuff called shrapnel. It's not only the fact that it's pieces of things, but it's also burning hot, searingly hot. But they also have the advantage of using something called solid shot. Now, solid shot does not explode, okay? That is like the typical true cannonball, right? Most of the time you're gonna use that against like forts and things you wanna destroy, right? It's gonna like knock out stuff. But in the case of, you're gonna use what you got, right? You're not just gonna not use it because it might not be the perfect piece of ammunition. But they are going to use that as well, and that is going to be devastating because when that hits you in the side, if we were to look at this line of soldiers, it starts with one. And while you may be strong, and while you may be, solid, you won't stop it. Nor you, nor the other 16 men down the line. Soldiers would write, they would talk about cannonball, solid shot, raking through the lines of men and taking out 16 at a time. Now again, that's an estimation. When you're in the midst of everything that's going on, their numbers might be off, but nonetheless, it was doing the damage. And that solid shot coming through, because these guys would be in lines of two, it would just wipe out, it could wipe out a complete line.
What's the formula for figuring out the 100?
Oh yeah. Again, we're moving way into the physics world. Not my realm. But that is what each of these brigades are facing. Add to that, now you have the Union line ahead of us. And what do we have directly ahead of us? If you were to follow, see how this path is kind of mowed into the field here, and it does start to break off to the left. We have the large Kadori barn off to our left. But if you were to take this path and not follow the curve, if you were to walk straight toward the monument that's got the person on the top and then the domed monument, which is the Pennsylvania Memorial, just off to the right and off through that area is also Union artillery. So that's now going to be hitting you from the front. You also have, as you look up to your left, if you were to follow that curved path, looking up to your left, we can see more monuments and more vehicles now parked on our battlefield roads, our avenues. There's now artillery up there. You are now being faced with artillery on 3 separate fronts, all training their guns on you. And have you fired a single shot yet? Not at all. What is your artillery doing? The best they can. They only have 5 to 15 rounds of ammunition each. And they could exhaust that in what, 1 to 5 minutes. We're going to continue forward, and now what will begin to happen is the infantry units, or the Pickett's division, his brigades, need to aim toward the center of the Union line. Straight ahead is not the goal for the Confederate Army. We don't want to go toward what is the Pennsylvania Memorial. They want to break through over here to our left, further up Cemetery Ridge and further or closer to Cemetery Hill. In order to do that, those men, the Confederate soldiers, cannot keep moving forward in a straight line. They must now turn. So if we were to keep walking straight, we would go straight to the Pennsylvania Memorial. We will now need to turn in a maneuver called an oblique. We will sidle this way. When we do that, we will take our right flank, our right shoulder, and we will face it directly to the Union line. We are now receiving even more enfilade fire. As we do that, if we take a look at how this path curves, what have we also done with the artillery on Little Round Top? It's now firing in our rear. If you look at where those guns could be, and they could train it down on these men, it is firing directly in their back. We're going to keep moving forward, just as they did. Okay. So we talked about the ridges being to our advantage. We talked over from the Confederate position, the ridge line was to the advantage. The valley below was to an advantage behind them when they started off. It was a means of protection. Once they started advancing, any advantage they could find, they were going to use. And so from the ridge that we just came from, now down into this valley, we have maybe not the best of both worlds, but we're just going to try and use it if we can. What I mean by that is, remember how we said we're making now this left oblique? We would have been facing to the east, to the front, toward the enemy, toward the Union line. But as we do so, and especially as my battle line right here is forming nicely, looking over now to your right, what do we see? We see the open face of Little Round Top. And all we have to do is move a couple, maybe another 100 feet more, and now Little Round Top is directly behind us. These soldiers, though, also have another dilemma. They're supposed to, this attack is supposed to be coordinated. They're supposed to be moving with each other. If we were Armistead's men and we came out of that point of woods and we're coming this direction, which we're roughly following Armistead's attack at this point, looking over your right shoulder, over this field, it has another little ridge. Can we even see where maybe Garnett and Kemper would have been? Nope, can't see them at all. As we look to our left, as we look up this ridge toward that Virginia worm fence, can we see where Pettigrew and Trimble's men were? Nope. To coordinate an attack and link up with them? Not at all. As we look to our front, can we use this valley for maybe a minute's peace against the Union enemy?
Dress the lines.
We can dress the lines potentially, depending on what heat is coming from Little Round Top. But right here in this valley, as we were to look straight ahead through this orchard, this is our last moment before the continued advance, where they is in somewhat covered from Union artillery, and we have not felt it yet, but we are about to feel the Union infantry from along Cemetery Ridge. Have the Confederates fired a single rifle shot at this point?
Nope.
No.
Probably not. All they're doing is walking. They are walking under consistent artillery fire from 3 different fronts. They are losing men. Men are dropping from injuries. Men are dropping, being outright killed. And let's be honest, some men are dropping from the heat, and other men are dropping out of sheer fear. And that's not a slight against them. It's just a simple reality of what they were doing on that day in that afternoon and what they were about to face. You know, if you're looking at it just kind of on paper, they're walking, right? Now they're walking under fire. They're walking under intense fire. They haven't even necessarily engaged in battle. They haven't fired a shot yet. And they're taking on casualties, stress, heat, fear, terror, all of those things combined. They haven't even made it to the Union line at this point. They may dress their lines. They may hope for the best that Kemper and Garnett are dressing theirs as well and advancing. Kemper's men, I will tell you, are being mowed down by the second. His right regiment, his Virginia troops, had no option except to just walk through that withering fire. And as is natural when you're a human being, if we're advancing toward the Union line, what's going to happen to that right side? What are those men naturally going to do? They are going to push this way. They are going to just try and get out of everything that's coming at them. So that will also cause the lines to become somewhat disoriented and not be able to link up as clearly. They reform the lines. Beyond the crest of this ridge is when the entire charge changes. The Confederate artillery not advancing. Some of the men would turn around because they understood that that was the plan, and there were also some infantry soldiers that would also come up in reserve that were supposed to come behind them. Many of these men looked around and saw very little. One of the Union soldiers who was watching this charge as they advanced, would write this about the Confederates. He said, "Men are being mowed down with every step, and men are stepping into their places. There is no dismay, no discouragement, no wavering. It grows in magnificence as death's sting waxes stronger, and we answer their spurt with more shot and shell." So as each Confederate fell, those in the rear rank would move forward. As the colors fell, men would move forward and drop their weapon, because you didn't carry a rifle when you carried the colors. So they would move forward, drop their weapon, and pick up those flags, and based on this soldier, still they advanced on. And that's what we're going to do as we crest this ridge. All right. Someone asked me earlier about terrain and does this area look the same. The Emmitsburg Road has been built up over time. It was actually sunken much deeper than what you see today. And there was actually areas where the soldiers could take a minute and fall behind kind of a very small ridge to gather themselves before coming across. We conveniently crossed right in a break through the fence. But what you see lining the Emmitsburg Road are what is called turnpike fences. These turnpike fences line the main roads coming into Gettysburg. When I mentioned earlier the Virginia worm fences, they kind of do a zigzag pattern. Farmers use the worm fences to move pastures quickly, because those fences really just rest on each other. You can take them up, tear them down relatively quick and painless. These turnpike fences, these are upright poles, 5 beams across, built into the ground, and they don't move. Unless you had soldiers tearing them down previous, these fences were still here. And many of the soldiers noted these fences. When they crested that ridge and they came up toward the Emmitsburg Road, instead of having free open pasture and land to walk through, they now had to stop. And now you have to climb. And you don't just climb one fence, you climb 2, because it borders both sides of the road. And you don't just climb and get down easily. You've got gear, you've got your rifle, the colors are an amazing target. You know, your bayonet or your other, your metal pieces are glinting in the sun. And you're going up. I mean, if you were okay hiding behind the berm along the Emmitsburg Road, fine. But now, not only are you standing, now you're up. You are up on top of a fence, not once, but twice. The organization to the regiments was deteriorated. If it hadn't already deteriorated from cannon fire, from swales, and from vantage points where you could not see who you were supposed to connect to, it was now deteriorating significantly. Now these men were advancing not necessarily in battle lines, but more like a mass of humanity. Once you get to this point, if we were to look straight ahead, we see the ground rises to Cemetery Ridge. And upon Cemetery Ridge is where the Union Army would be. We have now, as the Confederates, as we're advancing in their footsteps, made ourselves prime targets for two things. The Union Army can now fire rifles into us, because now we are within range, and now they can do something else. What can they now do? Canister. Canister is not a solid shot. Well, I mean, it kind of is, but it's not. It's not a solid shot. It's not an exploding shell that explodes up in the air and rains down on you. It is a shotgun. It is a can of these, iron balls that, when fired, exit out of the cannon tube and rain through individuals. And not only can you fire canister, but as some of you said, you can fire double canister. You can multiply that impact. Have the Confederates fired a shot yet? Probably not. But it is probably now that they will attempt to do so, if at all possible. But once you fire, what does that do? If you're the Confederate soldiers firing your weapon, what does that do?
It's going to take you 20 seconds to reload it.
It's going to take you 20 seconds to reload it. It slows you down. And so I'm going to tell you probably everything was happening along the way. But looking up ahead, we now have open field. We're in a valley, and we are going to move up toward a stone wall. A stone wall 2 to 3 feet high that the Union Army would have been hiding behind, using for protection of whatever that afforded as they were being unleashed upon with the Confederate artillery. Lieutenant John Lewis of the 9th Virginia survived the attack, but he would write this at about this point, seeing that, looking down to the southeast, again to the Round Tops, they are now on our flank again. Again, we are Armistead's men. Garnett and Kemper would have been down in this direction, but he would write this: we see ourselves being surrounded. The fire is already from both flanks and front, but yet they fight on and die. This cannot last. The end must come, and soon there is no help at all. All the officers are down, with few exceptions, either killed or wounded. Soon a few of the remnant of the division will start to the rear, followed by shot, shell, and musket balls. As we talked about, at each moment, men are making the decisions to move on. Men are being casualties. They are killed, they are wounded, they will end up missing, at this point not necessarily captured, but soon to be. Now some of the officers, General Armistead, General Kemper, and General Garnett are still leading their men on, but this is where it starts to deteriorate even more. Garnett will fall closer to the wall. Some will say rifle fire, some will say cannon fire. We don't know. His body is never found. General Kemper will go down wounded. Armistead will continue on, and it is now his footsteps specifically that we will follow up to the wall. So we'll keep going.
Yeah.
All right. So we've made it to the wall.
Run up. Is it? No, that's not the first one. Okay, that's right there.
Armistead's men, Garnett's men, Kemper's men are now, there's really no sense of battle formation, battle line at this point. There's really just one mass of Confederate attack coming from this wall behind me. Again, this was about 2 to 3 feet high, runs north and south. This is an area known as the Angle. after, of course, the attack. But it runs south toward the Round Tops. The last push for the Confederates is one of desperation, we might say. They have realized on the march over that the artillery has not formed up behind them and has not been providing the support that they thought was going to be available. They have also realized that some of the infantry units that were designated as support have not moved forward as they thought was going to be available. They have also realized that to our north, where the Pettigrew and Trimble attack will be, not all of those men advanced forward. Some did not advance with the attack, and others were starting to wither, as they had even further to go, since this wall behind me takes a jog at two 90-degree angles, making almost sort of a zigzag or Z pattern. So the Pettigrew and Trimble assault had even further to go to kind of crest Cemetery Ridge. But here, Armistead, General Lewis Armistead, seeing that this was probably the last opportunity that they would have to break through the Union position, rallied his men, and the story goes, put his hat on his sword, that was something to guide upon, and tried to bring these Virginians up and over the wall that you see here. The Union troops, the Union regiments that would be lining this wall, did feel the pressure of this wave of attack, and they were actually pushed back to the ridge beyond you, where the cars are parked currently today. So there was a momentary breakthrough. Yes?
How tall was the wall at the time?
About 2 to 3 feet. It was not a substantial type, it was just a farming wall, like a property barrier. So as the Union Army pushes back and retreats to the ridge just beyond us, Armistead's men, some of Garnett's men, some of Kemper's men, at different areas along this wall will come up and over, and they will rush into this open ground. It was a farm field back then. But by this point, they are exhausted. They are depleted, and there is very little left that they have that can continue this push. There will be hand-to-hand combat, rifles being waved in the air, used as like baseball bats or clubs. And that fighting will sustain for a few minutes, but quickly the Confederates will realize that there's nothing left. They will realize that there's nothing left, and now they will have to figure out their next step. Do they stay and become killed? Do they stay and get captured? Do they risk being injured and ending up in a Union field hospital? Or do they now retreat back from the wall, all the way back to where they began? And men will make all of those decisions. Some will die, some will be wounded and captured, and others will begin that long retreat. Some will say that they were walking backwards, so that as they retreated, they would not be shot in the back by the enemy. The cannonade lasted 2 hours. What we just did lasted 2 hours, but the actual charge, some would estimate, would last between 30 and 40 minutes. That's it. That's all it took. Now, we stopped and talked. We organized, we waited for everyone to join us. They continued moving. Other than dressing their lines and trying for a moment of respite from the incoming fire, they were moving all the time. By 30 to 40 minutes, it was quickly realized that Lee was not going to be able to break the Union line. The Union Army had an inkling that the Confederate Army would attempt this type of attack. They had an organization called the Bureau of Military Information, commanded by Colonel George Sharp. Sharp and his men were probably the first to use all-source intelligence gathering, and what that means is they asked a lot of questions and used a lot of different means of getting information. They wanted to figure out what they had in front of us. They needed to know what the enemy looked like. So by talking to prisoners, talking to the wounded, they were able to roughly sketch out the Confederate Army. And they realized that there were only a handful of fresh troops that would be placed into any sort of attack on July 3rd. And they had gone through what we call an order of battle. Let's call it a family tree. You know, it gives us all the different elements of an army. They went through this and realized that they had conversations with or had taken prisoners from every element of Lee's army save one. And that was Pickett's division. So Meade knew, or roughly had an idea, that those are the only fresh troops that Lee has for July 3. If they could withstand any type of attack, it would only have 5,800 to 6,000 men ready to go, in addition to men who were already battle weary. The Confederate Army would never know that until well after the battle. They would retreat across the field. Lee would have to come up with another plan, and that would be that the Battle of Gettysburg was over. There was no way they could continue to exist in the north. They were too far away from supplies. They had too many days of significant casualties, and thus the Battle of Gettysburg would end. The campaign continues for a few more days as they retreat through Maryland. But now at this point, some will say the tide turns. The Confederate Army does not win all the battles from here on out, nor does the Union Army win all the battles. And these individuals, little did they know that it would take 2 more years to figure out the American Civil War. But this would be known as, or become known as, the high water mark of the Confederacy. It was roughly the furthest north that any major engagement had taken place. And the war would return back down to Virginia and eventually be decided 2 years later. So with that, I'm going to end our story of Pickett's charge. I just want to thank everybody for hanging with me on this warm September weekend. I appreciate it. It's probably been about 5 years since I've done this program. So I appreciate y'all.
What happened to Armistead? Did you say what happened to him in the end?
Armistead will come up and over the wall, and he will make it roughly to where that scroll monument is behind you, where he will fall mortally wounded.
Mortally wounded,
Yes.
got it. Thank you.
He'll be transported to a hospital beyond the field here, known as the George Spangler farm, and that's where he will go.
Wasn't he a Mason? Wasn't there something to do with him being a Freemason?
Yeah, he was.
Yeah. Yep. There were many that talk about that. I don't know, all the ins and outs of Masonry.
No.
But yes, he was.
That's why Houston didn't hang Santa Anna.
Ah, okay. Now, for
They were
those
both
who are
Masons.
heading back, please do take your time. You're going to walk back the same pathway that we came.
You ain't running me over. God dang.
No, I'm jumping in the AC. All right. So, but thank you all for coming out. I appreciate it. I hope you have a good rest of the day.
Hey,